We have Jeremy this evening.
Jeremy. Good to see you. Oh, here we go. Thank you very much. All right, are we ready to go? Thank you. Okay, good evening and welcome to the April 12th Belmont Light Board. Sorry, August 12th Belmont Light Board meeting. Nice to actually be back with everybody again. It's been a bit of a hiatus. I'm Tom Caputo, Chair, joined by Adam Dash, Vice Chair.
Good evening.
And Roy Epstein, member of the Light Board.
Hello.
We also have with us Chris Roy, General Manager. Hello, Chris.
Evening.
Okay, so a couple of community announcements and then we'll get right to the agenda. Starting Monday, September 9th, Belmont Light customers will be able to use Smart Hub to pay electric and water bills online. Belmont Light is discontinuing online payments through Invoice Cloud after September the 8th. If you have already signed up for Smart Hub, you can sign up. If you have already signed up for Smart Hub, you can sign up for online payments on September the 9th. If you haven't signed up for Smart Hub, you can do so now by visiting belmontlight.smarthub.coop, but you will not be able to sign up for online payments until September 9th. In the meantime, you can log into Smart Hub at any time to explore your electric and water usage and connect with Belmont Light. For more information, please visit www.belmontlight.com or call 617-993-2800. Any other announcements? Okay. All right, so we will begin with a continuation of our discussion of the Municipal Light Board's endorsement of climate legislation. So Chris, we have evolved a bit since our last conversation, where at the time we felt like there was information put before us that we didn't have enough time to review.
Sure.
And I know there's been a number of weeks that have transpired where we've had a chance to get more context. If I understand correctly, the Light Board Advisory Committee also picked this up the other day. So could you kind of summarize where we are at this point, and then we can pick up the discussion from there?
Sure, absolutely. So I guess to go way back, so we initially had supported this legislation 2863 back in February, March timeframe. And since then, there's been this other bill introduced, which was labeled H832. And so the discussion in July was essentially revising our endorsement or updating our endorsement potentially from the 2863 bill to the H832 bill. And some of the key details behind the reasoning behind that suggestion is that H832, which I'll get to, it has a new number now, but for consistency, I'll refer to as 832. That has climate targets that are closer or very similar to our power supply policy and our roadmap from the Energy Committee. So there's quite a bit more of an overlap there, whereas the 2863 has less aggressive climate targets and is more liberal with its definitions of renewable energy. So there's an interest to take a more specific and regimented approach. The downside, in my opinion, or the risk, I should say, with the H832 is within that, which happens with a lot of new legislation over the decades, is it now tries to regulate municipal light plants. And so that has always been a sticky point with any new legislation about where those pressures on the lines of jurisdiction between the state and local level. And so where we are today, as we sit here, there's, I guess, designated informal recess at the state level for August. So we expect things to pick back up on September 1st. But interestingly enough, H2863, which is the original bill, has not moved anywhere. It's still in the Energy Committee, but 832 has moved. It's now moved to the House Ways and Means Committee and has been rebranded H3983. And so why is that significant? It's really any movement in that regard shows progress towards adoption. And so I think an important discussion point of that is, you know, what do we want to see out of that legislation as something moves closer to adoption that could significantly impact us? I think that just lends itself to being more engaged about whether or not we weigh in on what our opinion is. So enter this letter. This letter, again, is certainly editable. Is that a word? Editable. But can be changed, and but conveys that positive message that we're doing a lot of great things. We don't necessarily think there's a big value add to the additional steps for state oversight. And so really the idea of the letter at hand is to just demonstrate that we've been very successful along the way. We've done a lot of really great things. And so rather than have this open-ended, and I believe the language in there, if you look at the first bullet point, this open-ended statement, in mandatory MLP inclusion in all regulations and programs therewith. And so it's very open-ended, and it's kind of a risk to say, we don't really know what's coming, but you're going to be doing it. And so that first bullet was, I guess, an effort to try and just state that, well, look, we're doing all this great stuff. You know, we find this to be a risk to our organization to just have this broad brush that says we're regulated from here on out for all programs therewith, whatever that may be. But we do agree with the climate targets. And so that was kind of the intent here, to serve as a discussion point, and then kind of see where the conversation goes from there.
So last time we discussed being whether or not to support H 832, which is now 3983, and to oppose H 2863, which still has the same number. And so this letter sort of does, really it's more of support for 3983. It does sort of, you know, say something negative about 2863, but it's not in opposition to 2863, but it sort of implies that. And this was sort of the compromise from the last meeting.
Exactly, and I guess it just shows, like, in my opinion, I guess, an update in thought process. I mean, with the information at hand, we initially supported movement in this direction through supporting 2863, and so now we're just revising our stance should this be favorable.
And it is worth noting that H 2863 we have previously supported publicly, correct?
Before they watered it down.
Correct.
Exactly.
But right now, as far as anyone could tell, we're on record as supporting H 2863.
Exactly.
And that's one of the reasons why to come out and say we've changed our mind, which, like, and as, you know, Chris sent around, you know, Princeton has done and Ipswich has done, and other communities are also, I understand Hingham or others are doing.
Point.
They're all pulling their prior support because they changed the legislation, which I think is, you know, perfectly reasonable. If you change the legislation, then my vote changes on some of these things. So I think that's only reasonable, and I think that, you know, this is something where they're seeking public comment on these, and I don't know who's better situated to make that public comment than the munis, because this is really who it affects. And I think that the legislators that we're not going to make the decision, clearly. I mean, we're not legislating this, but the legislators want to hear what we think, and then they'll take it into account and do what they do. And I liked what you had last time, honestly, which was more blunt about, you know, being opposed to 2863. I understand the compromise, and it does talk about our initial support of 2863, which kind of feels like you're kind of backdoor giving it a little shade, but that's fine. So,
That's all right.
So, I mean, I would be fine coming out and saying we're opposed to 2863 in its current form, like Princeton and Ipswich and others have done, because I think that's honestly, I don't know, my feeling on it, but curious what the others think.
Well, so could you summarize the Light Board Advisory Committee view, or I don't know if the chair of the Light Board Advisory Committee would like to join us and summarize, but I understand there was a relatively involved conversation. Uh-oh, you're kind of giving us a bit of a look.
Yeah, I am. Steve Plansky, Chair of the Light Board Advisory Committee. You know, I just think there's a lot of different ways to look at this, and we did go round and around on it. Everybody wants aggressive climate goals. it's unclear to me, this legislation doesn't just deal with energy, it deals with transportation emissions, structure, residential, commercial, industrial, manufacturing process. So it's very comprehensive. And it also asks for or mandates a zero net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. It's hard for me to know, as much as we want aggressive standards, it's hard for me to know whether that's doable. I think the legislation sets up a body to write regulations to achieve that. For Belmont Light, our energy policy says within a modest rate impact. I just don't. So I think part of the discussion of the Light Board Advisory Committee is trying to get our hands around this. And as much as we want to be aggressive, how do we know enough to really know that this is reasonable, or is it just sort of aspirational? And even if it, may not be something that's reasonable, it might be something like a politician might say on the stump, and maybe is that worthwhile. The other element that we discussed was what Chris has mentioned, which is the issue of the state mandating municipal light department goals. And even the legislation, which we're not supporting anymore, the
2863.
2863, thank you, would set that precedent. It's not good legislation in the sense that it wouldn't really move munis to do anything, but it does set a precedent that the state can mandate municipal responsibilities, and which is the same thing that we're dealing with in 832 and now 3983. So that's, how do you deal with that? I've said at meetings that the munis have to stand up and take responsibility for their greenhouse gas emissions and for climate change. But on the other hand, we're way beyond what some of the other munis are doing right now. So, and we do value our independence. I think you value the decision-making authority, which in some sense wouldn't be the same if it's mandated. So there's that conundrum. I think I've said enough, and I'll just say, it was a discussion that went around all those issues at the Light Board Advisory Committee, and we didn't come to a conclusion.
Well, I'll repeat more or less what I said at the last Light Board meeting, which is that I think we're all in agreement that Belmont Light's own actions have been admirable, and our targets are good, and we are making progress in all sorts of areas. In terms of getting involved with the nuts and bolts of actual legislation, I think it's still the case that it's easy to say we no longer support 2863. It's very different to say that we support 3983, because I think the reality is that we still don't really know even what's in the current draft of 3983, let alone how it might evolve. And to my mind, the recommendation for various climate action goals don't really matter for Belmont Light, because we're where we want to be anyway. I think the prospect of state regulation to really limit the independent governance that we've enjoyed all these years is something that we should vigorously object to. And this letter right now, I don't think takes a sufficiently strong position on why we object to really any state oversight of our affairs. We don't need it. And how policy should be devised, if any, to address other munis is an open question. My feeling when we met last time is actually somewhat incrementalist, in that I thought that it would be a good idea if Chris went to Beacon Hill and explained exactly what Belmont is doing as an independent muni, as a model maybe for all the other munis. But at the same time, there's a good number of munis in Belmont who are differently situated. We certainly do not know the reasons for whatever decisions they've taken in different areas. You know, for example, some of them have generation, some of them don't. Some of them are larger, some of them are smaller. And what kind of legislation and what kind of regulation, if any, would be most suitable, I think, is something that we certainly are not in a position to decide at this point. I thought it would be a good idea if, since I understand from Chris's explanation at the LBAC meeting, that ENE and at least one other organization is actually representing Muni's interests in Beacon Hill. There's kind of strength in numbers. I think if we have a good argument, we should make our case to ENE to represent Munis as a group rather than write frankly, an inadequately developed letter and leave it at that. I think we should work collectively, and also I think it would be valuable if Chris took a more visible role with the other munis, explaining how it is that we've gone about achieving the targets that we have, and hopefully be a model for how others can be more aggressive. But I just think right now it is extremely premature to embrace 3983 when the risk of unfortunate regulatory consequences, intended or not, actually would be a real downside.
Yeah, I'll mention a couple things. So one, I wholeheartedly endorse any efforts that we can make to bring other munis kind of along towards embracing the challenges of climate change and moving to a greener and greener power portfolio. I share some of your concerns about additional state regulation on the MLPs, and I think that's an aspect of 3983 that concerns me. I think my broader question here that I struggle with is, what role can we play, or how do we effectively play a role in influencing and guiding legislation without having to constantly be providing support for bills, removing support for bills, providing support for bills, but with modifications? It seems like the state legislative process is enough of an evolving, kind of busy process that I don't know that we want to each week be sitting here together saying, well, what happened last week? Are we still supportive of 3983? Oh, we're not. Okay, let's make this change. So I worry about the practicality of what we're trying to do, even though I support the principle of what we're trying to do. So one, I do think there's agreement that at this stage we should probably publicly withdraw support for 2863, because I think we're all in sort of agreement that that's not what we're supporting. Again, in principle, I sort of back this, but I'm struggling with what happens a week from now when this legislation changes and we have another conversation. Is there a way, and Chris, maybe this is a question to you, maybe it's to Roy's point, is there a way for us to advocate on Beacon Hill, get the message out there, be productive, be pushing things forward without having to try to take positions on immature legislation as it goes through the process?
Sure.
I guess I sort of pose that to the group. Are there some ideas for how we can do this more effectively? Because I struggle with what we've got
Well, Chris,
in the process right now.
I think it would be helpful if you could basically recap what you told the LBAC about the role of ENE and the other organization in representing, basically as lobbyists, the interests of the munis in Beacon Hill.
Sure. Yeah, all right. I think that's somewhat of the majority of the answer to your question. And so historically speaking, and this is, again, evolving as the industry evolves to these more complicated topics, but so we engage with ENE, and ENE has an offshoot of that, ENE Strategies, which we're a member of, with Vin Ragucci, who's our registered lobbyist. And so he's one of three, which is a whole side discussion that we could have, but there's ENE for us, there's MWIC, who they have the other 20 or so munis with their lobbyist, and then there's MEME, which now all of us come together, and yet we have another lobbyist. And so, so there's really three different lobbying firms representing MLP interests on Beacon Hill. And so we have the best access to E&E, and so we're one of the 22 members that I email Vin all the time with providing our input. So similar to here, we're one of 22 voices that somehow they have to navigate when they go with their messaging. But this issue, just to kind of comment on the local control piece, all the way back, and we kind of touched on this at LBAC, all the way back, we just went to the 90s, for instance. 1997, the electric industry restructuring. The unifying voice for MLPs was local control. That was unanimous and a very strong voice, and coincidentally then, out of 1997, MLPs retained the local authorities that they have today. And so and that's been in smaller volumes through different legislative bills that crop up year to year. And so this is another, I think, one of those smaller, well, I'd go medium even, medium legislative efforts where, you know, I think that's a unanimous voice consistently across all MLPs that they like to retain that control and don't see a real value in adding in an additional layer of state oversight. And so having that documented publicly and updated every so often for the records, I think is valuable. And then what we've done from time to time as managers, this is one of the core roles that's similar through all managers in the industry. That's when we go and, you know, I engage with Vin on a regular basis. I go to meetings and then weigh in there. And so that's where NEPA has a legislative committee. You know, I'm leaving out the federal level. There's a whole nother federal element to this that we haven't discussed. So it's really handled as part of the day-to-day operations for GMs. As long as, I think, consistently, historically speaking, with pretty clear backing from local policy. So they carry that message forward. It's not until you get to the climate targets where now we're starting to see a variation. I mean, historically speaking, it was reliability, low cost, and local control. That was pretty straightforward messaging. But now we're evolving into, well, we want aggressive targets. Well, we want medium aggressive targets. And so it's been a lot more complicated to get a unified voice there.
And I just wanted to weigh in on your question, Tom, briefly. I mean, the reality is we're a small player. We have 10,000 customers about, there's probably 3 million, Chris, maybe in the state, electric customers. So, and we go through our lobbyists, but they, as Chris just said, represent a lot of other municipals. So, you know, unless we wanted to hire our own lobbyist, which I don't think is anyone would contemplate, and as you say, you know, the legislation will change, and we're not really experts on the legislative process. I'm not, at least. And what should our role be, I think, is the great question. Do we go through do we lead by example, which Chris has
Clearly
already
we do
done.
and should continue to do.
Done a great job with
Yep.
that. We're way beyond what others have, almost everyone else has done. Do we try to weigh in on each of these legislative pieces, knowing that, let's, you know, to be frank, I don't think that our letter, one way or another, is going to move things. So, you know, where do you end up? I mean, it's a lot. You can spend a lot of time on each of these, each piece of legislation, yay or nay. I'm not saying you shouldn't look at some of it, but to look at all of it would take up more time than anybody has.
Even our letter is a little bit muted, right? We're saying we support H3983, but not really. With this provision, remove this. And if a senator were to stand up at Beacon Hill and say, Belmont Light Board supports H3983, I think I would say, no, we don't, actually. we support aspects of it, and then there's these other caveats. So, are we really even giving the legislator much tools, in that regard in terms of advocacy? That said, I would love to find a way to champion the good work that we've done and to advocate and to use our position of leadership to help influence, which I think is largely the direction that we want the state to go. I really struggle personally with the day-to-day, week-to-week, where are we on each evolving bill? So, anyway, you have some commentary? You've been making some notes, I see.
Well, first of all, to just sort of put that aside, I'd like to move to, that we vote to oppose H 2863 and assign Chris Roy to write a letter to the legislature stating so. Please get that off the table.
I will second that. Any further discussion?
So the letter should say what?
That we are withdrawing our support for H 2863.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. If no further discussion, all in favor? Aye.
All right, so that.
So at least we have that.
I just want to
that
make sure we
addressed.
put that on.
No, I
there.
fully
So-
agree. I think that's important at this point.
and so
And I think
Chris
it
can-
underscores my point and my concern is that I worry we're going to be doing this every week.
Well, I don't have a problem with that, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that, to be honest, Belmont Light has needed this kind of oversight in the past. We are lucky right now that we're fortunate that we all in this room are sort of running Belmont Light, and we are doing it, I think, in the right way, and in an enlightened way, and in a climate change positive way. But that in the very recent past has not been the case. And I think it was very, very difficult to get anything at Belmont Light to happen until fairly recently, to be honest. And I think that other municipalities may be in that same situation. There are some munis who are taking no climate change action because their goal is to have the rates as rock bottom as possible, whatever the outcome, whatever the negative externality may be, and that is their calculus. For political reasons, because there are some light boards that are elected separately, and they're just out there to say, I'm charging as little as I possibly can, and the environment be damned. We always don't agree with E&E. We have disagreed with E&E many times since I've been on the board, and we can't just rely on them, I think. I mean, I think we provide public comment, and then the legislative process goes forward. It can change. We have public hearings on the incinerator site, post-closure use. People speak. We close the public hearing. We change what we're going to do. We don't necessarily, I don't hold people to what they said before we changed it, but I want to hear the public comment. It's the same thing. I think the state legislators want to hear what munis have to say. I think we're a leader in the green field. We've been rated that way. I think we are clearly a leader in it. I think we should pull some of these other munis with us. I think it's unfair that we sort of take this on ourselves and others are not taking it upon themselves. I wish everyone would step up, but I understand human nature is such that that's not going to happen unless there may be a little stick behind it to make them do it. So I think we're a policy board. I think we need to lead, and I think we need to go out there and say what we think is right. I mean, I think if you say we're in support of this with this proviso, that's what we say. If people can spin whatever they want to spin, but I think what in writing it is, if that's what it is, then we should come out and we should say something and bring others along with us. I don't see what the problem with that is. And I think we need to stay on top of legislation. I applaud Chris for bringing this to us. I mean, I think if we stick our head in the sand, we're not keeping up with legislation on this and on a lot of areas that affect the town of Belmont, not just the light board. I think we could get, whacked without realizing it. We need to be involved in the process with the rough and tumble of the legislative process. We're not legislating it, clearly, but we are providing public commentary during the public comment period like lots of other towns do. And then the senators and reps will do what they do, but I think we should at least make our voice be heard. I mean, I was fine with the letter last time, and then the letter got watered down. I could go for the watered down letter, but I didn't think that it needed to be watered down. But that's whatever that's my feeling on this. I think we should, step up and be heard on it. And if other legislation like this comes down the pike, I'd like to take it up then as well. I think it's important.
So just to play it out, if I might, again, because I'm really struggling with it. I think I'm largely in support of what's here. I think the part I'm struggling with is if this legislation changes a week from now, do we take another 30 minutes at the next light board meeting to re-debate that change and make modifications and adjustments? Like I almost feel like we could use all of our light board time just to be trying to keep pace with legislation. And it just seems like not the most productive use of our collective time here.
Even if the legislation does not change next week, I don't think this bullet point is adequate. It says it's removing specific language in the existing bill and making an affirmative recommendation that's not really spelled out about requiring MLPs to submit a comprehensive plan to the Secretary of Energy detailing a plan to achieve or exceed the greenhouse gas emissions limits established by 21N and 21N and a half. I think there could be a lot of nuance to what that plan should be like that needs to be spelled out. And then when it says enforcement of the plan should be akin to how the DPU enforces just and reasonable rates, I don't know if that's correct or legally defensible recommendation in any part. I can't imagine language of that sort would be part of a regulation. So I just think that this bullet as written does not really serve the purpose.
I guess, though, I struggle with the broader question, which is we could work to tweak this bullet point and maybe even get language such that we were comfortable. My concern is, again, we're just going to take a lot of time of the light board to get that right, and then next week when it changes, 2 weeks from now when it changes, are we going to be at it again? It seems like a very challenging
Let me put it differently.
process for me.
I view at least my role on the board as a fiduciary duty to Belmont and the municipal light board in Belmont, and to me that means preserving independence of this board. And a bill that possibly introduces regulation of an unknown nature onto the board, I think at this point I would just oppose that.
But it's regulations that require munis to do well less than what we're already doing, and
Well,
pulling everyone up to our level, which would create a level playing field
I
for
don't-
going out to purchase power and all. Because I think we're at a disadvantage when a lot of these people can just rock bottom, go out and buy grid power. I think that this would level the playing field and bring everyone up to our level. We're not dropping our level. This legislature doesn't really do anything to us.
It is still not clear what obligations are imposed on the board as a result of
Well,
this
you
language.
can look at the legislation. We had it provided last time. You read it, it says what it does. I mean, the legislation always during the process is constantly being changed up until the end of it. The public comment period opens, you provide comment, it closes, then they do what they do. You know, what comes out at the end of the day, comes out at the end of the day, but at least they have our comments and our opinion on it. And, if we don't give an opinion, they're going to pass legislation or not anyway. But I'd like them to at least have Belmont Light's opinion on it. I think we do have this paperwork. We had it a month ago as to what the legislation does. I mean, you like it or you don't. I understand that. If you don't like it, that's fine. But to say we don't know what it is, I don't think that's true.
Just to, maybe this helps a little bit. So that language was purely a thought that I had it's somewhere in the middle. So the original letter was support 832 or 3983 as it's currently written. The opposite end of that was remove all references to state regulation oversight. I was just attempting to put something in here that says, well, we do have an existing precedent with our rate setting. So if that is a happy medium to help reach agreement, that's something we could reference. But I didn't necessarily intend it to be a suggestion of legislative language.
Well, that's how it reads at present.
It's public comment. I mean, we're not writing the legislation. It's just public comment. You could say the sky is blue and sign it and send it in. It's just public comment. It doesn't even have to be relevant. I mean, people write all sorts of crazy stuff in public comment. Well, you've got someone who wants to speak. I think I've said what I
I'm
was
sorry,
gonna say.
yeah. Please, we ask that you introduce yourself.
Michael McCrae, Belmont Town resident, LBEC member. To the extent that it might be helpful for the board, I wanted to interject the following thought. In reviewing section 8 of, forgive me, 832, starting at line 125, the language introduces, unless the Secretary determines inclusion will not contribute to the Commonwealth's achievement of greenhouse gas emission limits. I think very importantly, when including municipal light districts and municipal light boards in such regulations or program, the Secretary shall consult with the municipal light departments, shall take into account where relevant their size, structure, and their existing programs, contractual obligations, and asset ownership. I absolutely hear the point about local control, and I'm not advocating for us to cede local control from that. But I would also interject that for competitive suppliers, which represent another large portion of sort of blanking on the acronym, the investor-owned utilities, there is no such language that I have ever seen that says the secretary has to consult with the competitive supplier or in any way engage with them on these things. So I think that is something that I'd recommend that we consider and run with in terms of, as they look to include and, in my opinion, rightfully sort of bring municipal light plants into compliance with the GWSA. This is really powerful to say that the secretary actually has to sit down and consult with municipal light boards. That doesn't exist for anybody else in that kind of language. So while I don't necessarily think ceding local control is something one should do frivolously, this is an area where I think there is a delicate balance that can be struck between ceding local control versus participating in a state program that's something that the state has sort of globally enacted. So there's a very important balance there that I think can be struck. And then one last point is, in the sort of industry or professional space, if you will, that discusses electric energy industry topics, I have heard multiple people bring up independently the letters that were referenced earlier from Ipswich, Princeton, as being very powerful points of leverage to sort of have that conversation with state representatives. So I do think that the voice of Belmont relative to the number of meters, number of accounts is disproportionate in that sense, that when a leader like Belmont Light comes out and voices written support or opposition for these bills, that it does have a very large impact. So for what it's worth, I offer that for consideration. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I guess we got to decide what we're gonna do here. I will say I'm personally struggling once again. I support what's in this letter. I really struggle with how we're going to continue to, use 80% of our light board time to try to go through the specifics of state legislation. So I guess I think I'm at a point now where I could vote to support this letter, because I do think it's an important issue, and I do think that our leadership is something that we hope people can follow, and our support can help. But I also think we need to figure out a process that allows us to more effectively comment on legislation without having it consume most of Albac's time in the last meeting and most of our time in this meeting. It just seems like, at least in my mind, something's not working. But I'm at a point where I think I can, at least in this particular case, because I agree with the sentiments in here, support this letter.
I do not support this letter. I do support what we discussed before about opposing 2863, but I think that if we're going to do something, it should be more thought out and detailed, and I think it requires more consultation with E&E and the other partners, and I think we should also speak to our own state representatives, Dave Rogers and Will Brownsberger, before actually proceeding any further with this.
Well, have you spoken to, at one point we had talked last time about you connecting with Dave Rogers and Brownsberger. Have you spoken to either one of them or both of them?
No, I have not. But that's, to speak more broadly, I think, to your point, that's one of the things that is on our to-do list, I think, is to build that relationship. I mean, we're right in their backyard, literally. So I think that is a relationship that, other MLPs use and is powerful in educating folks. Because just a 10-second editorial comment, I think that's an advantage we have where an RU sends a lobbyist up there who's not an expert. They're a lobbyist by trade, and they're knowledgeable to an extent. Here, you have general managers that are in the nitty-gritty, that can actually speak to any extent of questioning that might come up. And so it's a powerful educational tool that you have a resource there that can cover it and not say, hey, we'll get back to you, and then call someone. So that's on our list to do.
Okay. So with that, I suppose we can take a motion and close on this, and I would just ask that there's a follow-up to try to figure out a more efficient way that we can maybe represent our views without having to debate the merits of legislation during the process.
I'm not sure that that is legally possible with the open meeting law. I mean, I think it's an important topic, and obviously we have disagreement on the board. It's going to just take what it takes for time. I mean, I don't know what else to say. It just does.
Are there other energy bills pending before the legislature?
Many.
This is the challenge,
But
right?
this is a kind of a fundamental one. I mean, some of them are just so tweaky that I don't think we need to get involved in them, but.
Exactly. So there's many of which I think, there are things that I can weigh in informally, but the ones that directly influence or have potential impact to our structure as it is today are, I think, the ones that I flag for
I
discussion.
mean, I think we have to rely on Chris and his expertise as to what's important and what's not important, because some of them are IOU related, and unless you want to pile on the IOUs, there's really no reason for us to weigh in on the state whacking an IOU, so.
Yep.
But this is like
Okay.
right at our bread and butter, that's why I felt it was important.
Yep.
Well, I mean, we'll see how the vote goes, but I mean, I would move to to support the letter and sign it dated July 22nd, 2018, the draft that Chris has provided to us in front of us right now. But there's probably a better way to word that motion, but I would support this letter that's drafted dated July 22nd, 2019, to be submitted to the state legislature, to the recipients as stated on the letter.
And I can update the number.
Yeah, with the amendment to change H 832 to H 3983. And then in addition to the other letter you're sending on 2063. And so,
I will second that. I don't know that we're going to have universal support for this. Is there any further discussion on this, or have we beaten this sufficiently?
well, I think we've beaten this.
All right. Then I will call a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
Okay, so we vote in favor of this with a 2-to-1
I don't know if
majority.
we sign it, or you sign it, or who signs it, but,
We have it as the board member.
no, I'm just saying, in general, I don't know if the letter comes from you, or, because we set the policy, you can send the letter, I don't know that we need to send the letter, but.
Sure. No,
You
we
could
can
say,
send it.
you could say, on August 12th, 2019, the Belmont Municipal Light
Sure.
Board voted to have me, to this, whatever you want.
Got it.
I'm not, I don't know, maybe it's
I think
too
that's
late
fine.
for me to put words together right now.
Yep.
I know what you're saying.
All right, let's keep moving and see if we can get through some other items on the agenda. So would like to cover a introduction to virtual peaker. So I think, Chris, this is another one. Are you providing an update here?
Yep.
This was interesting.
Sure.
I don't know if I would call something like this peaker, it sounds a little voyeuristic.
All right, so, a theme, again, with our mission to lead the way, I thought it would be worthwhile just spend a little bit of time on highlighting this program that's gaining momentum. So we have this peak rewards reduction pilot program that we leverage the virtual peaker platform to do this. And so we picked a group of friendly guinea pigs, being our EV customers that are highly engaged anyway, to pilot this program. And so the idea is, to take a step back, the idea is as we move towards looking at time of use rates and electrification, and people are relying on energy more, we want people to be able to have more power, no pun intended, over how they use this. And so Virtual Peaker provides a platform and insight into how you use energy. And so as we add things, so this is piloted with EVs, and so looking forward down the road, it can also support other technology, such as your heat pumps, thermostats, things like that. So that's looking forward. But for this program, the pilot program is EVs, it was launched in June, and the intent is we'll pilot through the peak season, which is really through September, and that will give us the data that we can use to evaluate the program and make any necessary judgments or adjustments and adjust and work through the bugs and things like that. And so the goals are similar to storage, if you will, and your traditional energy programming. We want to reduce peak costs. It's especially important as we move towards electrification. We also want that energy to be consumed at the right times. And so this is a platform to help do that. And just one more comment on the bigger picture. Really, there's a couple of methods that utilities across the board use, right? So you can take the Big Brother approach, as it's been dubbed, but we could control everyone's end devices. And or option B, then there's we empower people to take control of their own devices. And then within that is another subcategory of carrot or stick. And so that's where time of use rates come in, incentives come in, one being a stick and one being a carrot. And so this is helping progress down that path of end user empowerment. And so what's really nice, virtual peaker, so the quick important point here, there are very few vendors to do this that are kind of independent. So if you go with a Honeywell, which is our smart meter provider, they say, well, you have to buy a Honeywell thermostat, or you have to buy a Honeywell EV charger. We wanted a platform that, again, you could bring your own device. We want people to have choices, because we feel like you're going to get a better participation rate if you have those freedoms. So Virtual Peaker, we found, has been taking that on as their business model. With residential, given how substantial the residential composition of our power supply is. And if you want individual stats, I'm happy to go through them. I don't know if you'd like me to breeze over those in the interest of time. But the high big picture view is it's been successful. We have the 21 EVs and one Sensibo HVAC control and one hybrid heat pump water heater enrolled. And so we've called 3 events so far to help mitigate that peak impact, and it's been successful. And so we hope to carry that on through and make adjustments. But again,
Can I ask you a question?
Oh,
On this
sure.
form here, it says, by enrolling your home devices in the Peak Reduction Rewards Program, you agree to let Belmont Light make brief limited adjustments to your use during times of peak electric demand. So what are you doing?
So that is currently, we don't actively go in and control your car charger, for instance. But this is from the website.
Yeah.
And so some of it's kind of disclaimer language, so we don't do that here. But I think it largely, we do it through behavioral mechanisms. But moving forward, we've talked about, again, this is not part of this presentation, but so as we get into reliability and bigger numbers, if we want to make sure, if we're using it for reliability or load shifting, now we're getting into a realm where we want to make sure when we hit the load shed signal, load is shed. And so that down the road is an element where we might have to engage to make sure we see the results.
So what would you do? If my car's plugged in, what do you?
Well, right now we can't because we don't have
Well,
end use
no, I
technology.
mean theoretically.
Oh, but okay,
what
so
would
in
you do?
theory, and this is what I've done in my past, is we do put a switch there. So it's in your house, and we communicate through the smart meters to that device, and we prohibit charging.
Would it just be to like the car charger, or would you turn off an electric stove in the process or something?
So at this time,
Or the lights or
it's
something?
usually focused on the larger devices. They do have new panels now that we could do circuit by circuit, so we could shut off your vacuum cleaner and.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
We could, we
What's the
don't do
slippery
that.
slope here is what I'm
Yes,
concerned
exactly.
about.
So this is the launch into the empowerment and behavioral approach along with rates. And so.
Is the other approach to actually have internet-connected devices such that you don't have to necessarily cut power to the outlet, but you could connect to the charger, for example, and have the charger shift its hours?
Exactly.
Okay.
We could do
That
that.
requires integration with each of the device manufacturers, which will take time.
Well, it's like my charger, you can set the time on.
So that's what this is.
So maybe Belmont Light could adjust the time settings, and
So we do, okay, so I guess that's advisors over here say that is what we're trying to progress to. So get away from the Honeywell model of adding a
Honeywell
hardware
specific thing, yeah.
to getting in and integrating with the Sensibo is the so Sensibo is external some ways, so you can't quite get into the Mitsubishi controller itself. So that was a bad example, but again, like ChargePoint, if you have a ChargePoint
Right.
device, you can get into the intelligence behind it. That's why there's this partnership being built. But we don't actively go in and control people's use.
All right.
So do you need anything from us at this time, or are you just sort of sharing an interesting update on something that we find?
Just sharing for general
Yeah.
information, and again, I mean, it can get sticky, you know, once you start getting into demand response programs and getting into people's homes.
Yeah.
That's why policy-wise, we might need to vote on it, because we need to set, I mean, we're not gonna micromanage what company they use or whatever, but I think
Right.
we, as a board, need to say whether this is something that Belmont Light should be doing.
Yeah.
Sure.
So right now, though, this is not anything, the only thing you're doing is asking folks to enroll, which is then allowing you to have visibility into their utilization, and then you're trying to shape that usage by behavioral emails and other signals.
Yes.
To ask them to
Exactly.
shed load,
Shaming.
shaming and.
Shaming, yes.
Shed load. Okay, so at this point, we're not necessarily doing anything to the homeowner's
No.
power, other than to send them an email and ask them to behave
And if they behave,
in a very sort of
Properly, we
kind
send
way
them
and
money.
agree.
But it's a pilot program, and then there's a financial incentive for playing along.
Yeah.
So, Chris, there are 21 participants now,
yes.
and
Is there a plan in place to ramp that up, or how do you plan to grow it?
Yeah, after the pilot program, I mean, with marketing, I mean, the big part of to tie in Heat Smart helps with this, because Heat Smart provides marketing for heat pumps, and through that process, we educate, you know, the community. So it's just our outreach, these two fine individuals and their hard work, you know, just getting the word out and why and how it fits in the big picture. It's really all marketing. But for the time being, we're trying to limit ourselves to the friendlies to help us. I mean, I have a whole section here on bugs that we found already, but it helps. The interesting thing I just wanted to add in real quick, similar to the policy comment, made me think of this. Given today's world, right, data has a lot of value. And so what we're finding is not just Honeywell, say, I don't know why I'm picking on them, but forcing us to use their product. But we find with ChargePoint's a big one. They say, we get your data, we're going to charge you to access it. So we're trying to really say, no, this is our data. You're not going to profit off of the community's data. And so we're being very defensive in that regard.
Makes sense.
That's good to know.
So it sounds like a good program, and glad to see you're piloting it. At this stage, you don't need anything from us, other than you wanted to keep us up to date, and you'll check back in maybe in 3 to 6 months as you add more participants and get more data?
October, you know, we'll get through the peak season,
Yep.
and so we'll have more to say in the fall. And we'll have other rate considerations at that time, too.
Sounds great. All right, 2 other updates in the general manager's update that you wanted to provide for us.
Sure. Again, just any, interest of any questions that come up, I'm happy to answer them, but this is just in the interest of an FYI too. I mean, with all of this other fun, we are still working on the voltage system upgrades. And so, that keeps the crews very busy. And so we have 2 things, I think, from the crew side, that's not just energy related, that we're juggling is, I'll go in reverse order, if that's all right. But so we've done quite a bit of work to date over the summer for what was Project C of trying to convert, geez, these puns keep flowing, but change that to a Blair Pond system upgrade project, system conversion project. And so there's been ongoing work on Leonard Street. That's resulted in significant load being converted to the Blair Pond substation. It was nice, actually, this summer. We've shifted enough load where Station 2 over at Chenery, it was less hairy during those peak days. So we've already reaped some benefit from this work, so that's good. And so, Dunkin' Donuts. So there's a list of things that we've done, but we're making good progress in that regard. And that takes all of our crew time. At the same time, one of your comments at the prior meeting made me think it might be worthwhile to quickly highlight this, but fiber expansion. So we've had some activity on that in the last couple of weeks, where to support fiber needs for primarily the schools, because they're under the most pressure given the school project, where we can help support them by running fiber from Blair Pond substation to Station 2 at Chenery. And that'll allow them to start their process to get out of the high school. And that'll also set the foundation to get out of, 450 Concord Ave.
Yep.
And so really serve as that backbone for some of those municipal needs. The advantage to that is at the same time, we're leveraging those connections to potentially look at those bulk ISP services that we could provide as a broadband service. And so what's nice is that is part of Belmont Light infrastructure, so that alleviates some of the burden from a general fund base to try and come up with those upgrades, which is nice. And we've designed it with sufficient expandability to house potential broadband services. So slow build out, so we expect that work to be going on in the next couple of months, probably fall. So just as a FYI, in case someone sees a fiber reel show up at the shop, it's really the big push is to get Blair to Station 2 so we can help with the high school
The high
project.
school. Makes sense.
Want to do the minutes?
Questions, comments? Okay.
Do the minutes real quick?
Yeah, let's do the minutes real quick.
I had no comments, I think they're fine. I would move approval of the Belmont Municipal Light Board minutes of Monday, April 22nd, 2018, Monday, April 22nd, Monday, April 22nd, 28, oh my God, 18, I guess it is.
Yeah.
How did that one slip through? The executive session minutes of the Light Board for Monday, April 22nd, 2019, the Light Board minutes of May 6th, 2018. Are these 18 or are these 19?
I'm confused about the first.
Because Roy was here, so therefore it's a 19. So let me back up for a second. So
Yeah.
we're going to be moving.
It is 19.
Yeah, move approval of the regular session Light Board minutes for April 22nd, 2019, the executive session minutes for April 22nd, 2019, the regular session minutes of May 6th, 2019, the executive session minutes for May 6th of 2019, and the regular minutes of July 15th, 2019. I didn't think we had minutes that were that old.
Yeah, exactly. Do I have a second?
Yeah, fixing the typo, seconded.
I think you commented with the appropriate date changes,
I
correct?
did indeed.
All right, all in favor of approval of the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. And with that then, our next meeting is, we should have that date. It's in
September 23rd.
September 23rd, 6 PM,
I would
and
note-
October the 21st.
I would note, just as a reminder, that September is typically when the chairmanship turns over on the Light Board. So that would
Absolutely.
be probably that meeting, if you so wanted to put it on the agenda.
I think that's a great idea. Can we request that that be added to the agenda?
Indeed.
Excellent.
'Cause your term is up.
My term is up. All right.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, we will adjourn the Light Board meeting and